I watched Chrspiracy and I have mixed feelings. So this film was originally going to be a Netflix original, but apparently Netflix wanted to tone down certain aspects of the film. So Kip and Cameron actually bought the rights of the film back and went the independent route, which is kind of interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Oh, I should say there are going to be spoilers in this, so if that bothers you, then, stop watching this video. So in Chrspiracy, we're introduced to this gospel musician who is having a crisis of faith because he's struggling to reconcile his faith and his spirituality with the practice of animal slaughter. And so he teams up with co-director Kip Anderson to try and answer the question,
is there a spiritual way to kill an animal?
And so they go traveling around the world, interviewing people who practice different religions to explore this question. And they don't just interview Christians, they also explore Islam and Judaism and Buddhism and probably other religious institutions and practices that I'm forgetting. I have spent the last few days obsessively discussing this film.
Can we talk about Chrspiracy, please?
How was it? What was it like?
It's so annoying.
It was bad.
Please! Tim, it's a 2,000-year cover-up.
You're such a weirdo.
When you look at the animal-related documentaries out there, it seems like there's a gap in the market for something that explores the ethics of animal slaughter and animal farming without just being 2 hours of torture footage in slaughterhouses and factory farms, because it's really, really hard to get people to want to watch that stuff. And so, yeah, I think it makes sense that they're trying to make a film that is exploring ethics, but doing so in a technically very good way in terms of like the cinematography and stuff, but also with like a narrative and an engaging story. But as I said, I have mixed feelings on this film. I should qualify all of this by saying that I'm certainly no expert on filmmaking. In fact, I'm actually in the process of directing my first feature film right now, and that has highlighted to me that I am certainly no expert on filmmaking. And, it almost feels kind of gross to criticize a film now that I have an inkling as to the effort and time and pain and stress that goes into making one of these things. Having said that, I think that in the animal movement, when a new film comes out, there is this tendency to just be very hyperbolic and say, oh my God, it's amazing, this is the best film I've ever seen, because it kind of agrees with the conclusion that we're making ourselves, that we think that what's happening to animals is terrible and this entire system needs to change. Anyway, so the first caveat is I'm not an expert on filmmaking. I'm going to say things that you probably don't agree with, and that's okay. And of course, the second caveat is that I care deeply about animal suffering. I'm kind of dedicating my life to it. I go to protests. I don't eat any animal products, and I haven't for like 7 years. I'm a very biased sample. It would be very interesting to see a survey of attitudes to people who aren't vegetarian or vegan and how they're perceiving the film. I think filmmakers who are making a film about an issue should do that anyway. We have a tendency to like live in our bubbles and hang out with people who already agree with us on the things that are most important to us. And if we want to appeal to people who aren't in that bubble, we should probably get some data to see how we're doing before the film is released. So starting off with something that I thought was really good is like the technical side of things. I thought the film was beautifully shot. Like I thought many of the interviews were just so beautiful and nice to look at. I did see this in a cinema. So, if you're going to watch this film on your cracked screen iPhone, then don't be coming at me in the comment section, okay? And I also thought the color grading was really nice. Like I've always thought that the Cowspiracy and What the Health had quite overblown color grading, and this one didn't have that feeling to me. It looked much nicer. And the editing as well, my God, like the editing was like so slick. It was really engaging in the way that it had been actually put together. Something that really stood out to me was how incredibly dense this film was. Like there were so many interviews and so many characters, and it kind of takes us into like so many little different stories that actually felt like it was distracting us from the central premise of the film. And I also just feel like having so many different sub-stories keeps things inevitably more surface level. You have this guy who used to eat roadkill and spiders and his own fish, and then he turns vegan, but like you don't really understand why he went vegan or like his thinking around it. And it just felt like, wait, why are we learning about this guy who ate his own goldfish? Like just because he used to eat animals and then went vegan? I guess like, is there an ethical way to eat an animal? I mean, he was eating roadkill, so they weren't being slaughtered. So I can kind of see that way in. It's just like, I don't know, that doesn't answer the question. I mean, that doesn't... the fact that he went vegan, it didn't actually explore whether eating roadkill is ethical. It just kind of said, here's a guy that ate roadkill and people were outraged and they were hypocrites and now he's vegan. It just felt kind of random and I guess it was like that. It was like we were like exploring all of these different stories and subtopics, that it felt like a bit of a jumble to me, to be honest. And it felt like we're going through so many different things here. There's a woman who's talking about intersectionality and suggesting that oppression between animals is interlinked with oppression with humans, and that maybe by helping animals, we're helping women. But it's so quick and so brief, and that's like such a big thing to explore. And then we're straight on to the next thing, and we're learning about the dog meat trade, and then we're on to the next thing. We're looking at Alex Hershaft and the Holocaust, and it just felt like a huge jumble of things that often weren't tied to this central premise of, is there a spiritual way to kill an animal? And then later on, when the film kind of goes back to that, to like this central question and this cover-up that they're trying to explain, then I felt like it gets more engaging again. It almost felt too disjointed to me throughout the film, like they were just trying to fit everything they possibly could about animal ethics into this film, even if it didn't really contribute to moving the narrative forward. You know, I find myself wanting to know more about like the internal experience and the characters and what's changing with them. Like this guy who was eating squirrels on the side of the road, dude, like, what's going on with you? What was your childhood like? Why? But like, it's all just so brief that it makes it feel more surface level, and then just straight on to the next thing. But of course, this is a subject-led film. It's not a character-led film. And maybe that's just my preference, that I prefer to learn more about people's internal experiences and how they're changing and what their thinking is like around it. This is also probably related just to the fact that Kip Anderson clearly has an agenda, which is an agenda I totally agree with, that like we should promote moral concern for animals. But I mean, you know, he has this setup of like, is there a spiritual way to kill an animal? Let's go find out. And you have this climax of like this uncovering this thing about Jesus Christ. And then in between, you just have loads of stories and interviews that are related to animal ethics that can often feel like tangents, but maybe it's just like, that's what they actually want us to think about, I guess, like our treatment of animals and whether we should go vegan. And they just kind of put it into this hyperbolic story to make it more compelling to people who wouldn't want to watch a film about animal ethics without the conspiracy stuff. So, you know, if you want to make a film exploring like our ethical treatment of animals and our relationship with animals, maybe that's like a really hard sell compared to there's this 2,000-year cover-up. Filmmakers who care about a problem of oppression that nobody wants to think about because they feel complicit and defensive, you kind of have to package it up in this nice bow of like this thriller movie that people are going to want to go see. But I don't know, at the same time, part of me feels if the idea is to just kind of get this pro-animal message out there to as many people as possible, then maybe you should have just compromised with Netflix and had a slightly watered down pro-animal version go out to millions of people. And if you're going to go down the independent route, then it kind of makes me think, why not just make a film that feels more authentic to what you actually care about and what you're actually interested in exploring? But I don't know. This is all like, I could be wrong about what the right thing to do is. And when you look at Kip Anderson's record, he's been incredibly successful in getting these messages out to large audiences. So who the fuck am I to criticize, you know? He's obviously had a huge impact in terms of promoting a more animal-friendly culture in a world where animals are being fucked, literally and figuratively. I can't help but be turned off by like the overly hyperbolic conspiracy vibe and the idea that they're in danger from the church. Like every now and then in the story, they would just cut to a scene that's suggesting they're being like spied on by the church or someone. And to be honest with, I mean, I could be wrong, but to be honest with you, I just didn't fucking buy it. It really, like, they have this part where there's like a drone outside of his hotel room, and he's like, this drone has been here 15 out of the last 20 days. What the hell? And I'm just like, I reckon he's fucking put his drone up there himself and recorded it. Maybe it is the case that the church are spying on Kip Anderson because they're worried that he's going to uncover the secret of Jesus Christ that they've been covering up for the last 2,000 years. But it seems like a bit of a stretch, okay? I'm just saying it seems like a bit of a stretch. There's this one point where Kip is just like walking home and he's like, there's this guy that's been following me for 20 minutes. And he turns the camera around and it's just this guy just like walking down the street, minding his own business. And it's just like, I'm just not buying it. So I'm just walking home, but I think I'm being followed by this guy. It's so weird. Hello? So strange. I don't know what's going on, but I think it's got something to do with Jesus Christ. But maybe I'm too skeptical. Like, since I've been learning about filmmaking over the last few years, I think I went from having a very naive view of documentaries, where I just saw it as like factual reality, to now seeing it as like art. Part of what filmmaking is taking the mess, the chaos that is reality, and then packaging it into this neat structure that allows us to go on this emotional journey and process things. And maybe that's why people like films so much, because it provides us with like resolution to the chaos. It's not a research paper. It is a very subjective piece of art where people are deciding which bits of an interview to include and which not. And there's just too much stuff in reality to give a completely balanced view anyway. And filmmakers who are also activists do have an agenda where they want to promote a message. And I think everybody just has a different line as to how far they're willing to go in terms of being misleading or hyperbolic or lacking balance. But the vibe of Chrspiracy crosses the line for me, to be honest. I'm hoping that in the edit I can make this seem like less disjointed and have more of a structure. It seems ironic for me to potentially criticize structure in Chrspiracy when the structure of my video criticizing it is like all over the place. So apologies. So you have the setup of, is there a spiritual way to kill an animal? And then you have all these interviews with people who are spiritual, and we're seeing like the contradictions, and it's not really making sense how they try and justify this. And then you have loads of like pro-animal stuff and little stories that, like I said, feel kind of out of place to me. But then towards the end of the film, it kind of pulls back to this main story that hones in on Jesus Christ, this cover-up. And they make the case that, well, Jesus Christ was against animal slaughter. It kind of felt like they made a decent case for it. Like they had these scholars who seemed reasonable who were making that case. They at least did a good job at making it seem plausible to me. So, and they had like a scholar looking up the correct translation of a word, and it turns out that that word is a word that suggests that Christ was actually concerned with the animals as opposed to thieves. So I don't know. Yeah, like that bit felt kind of compelling. Why does it make me cringe to say that? It feels like I'm being duped, like I'm acknowledging that they are willing to like manipulate to a higher extent that I feel comfortable with. But I'm like, actually, fuck, maybe it was a Chrspiracy. I'm going to be going around telling people that Jesus Christ was a vegan activist, and it's going to be cringe as fuck. Thanks for that. Now, it didn't feel very balanced. I mean, like, they didn't have reasonable sounding scholars providing other arguments to suggest that actually, Jesus Christ was giving people fish or whatever. I don't know anything about the scripture, which is part of the problem. I can't really comment on this part of the movie because I have no idea about Christianity or scripture or what the hell Jesus cared about. Just an example of the kind of overly hyped conspiracy thing. They're pointing towards the fact that some fast food chains in the US are making donations to the church, implying that they're paying the church to cover up the secret that Jesus Christ was a vegetarian who cared about animal slaughter because the fast food chains are worried about losing money. And it's like, really? I mean, so many rich people in the US are donating to religious institutions, and some of them are going to be connected to the meat industry. It's a massive stretch, I think, to suggest that they're doing that to try and get the church to squelch this idea that Jesus Christ was compassionate to animals. There's this moment where they hire a private investigator to, I think, explore whether they are being like spied on and followed, and whether the meat industry or the church are after them. And when you see the private investigator towards the end, he's like so clearly vegan as fuck that it's actually quite hilarious. He's like, 70 billion animals are being killed. It's like, wait, I thought this guy was like a private investigator. Why does he seem so incredibly fucking vegan? That's a bit sus. But I don't know, like, yeah, this whole thing with the conspiracy and that, like, are we in danger by the church, which they do in all of the Spiracy films.
Is there any threat or danger making a film like this?
Do you think there should be any concern of us making this documentary?
Would you say there's any safety concerns for me making this film?
It just gives me this sense of a lack of authenticity that I can't seem to budge. And I think the way that they force this conspiracy narrative and the idea that they're in danger just harms the credibility of the film, which is a shame because I think there is a lot of really important and really good stuff in this film. The most compelling part of the documentary for me was one of the tangents where we're learning about the dog meat trade, and there's this brief character who's this guy who's trying to save dogs from the dog meat trade, but he also tries to save farmed animals as well. But they're focusing on dogs, and they're showing us footage of dogs in these cages. And there is just something about the way that this guy is reacting to this problem just so authentically, breaking down on camera, crying, and pairing that with the images of the dogs in cages who are clearly being mistreated and are going to be killed. It's almost like for a brief moment you're able to break through that disconnect that we all have and see this for the fucking tragedy that it is, what's happening to animals. You know, I think even if you boycott animal products like I do and are relatively like aware of what's happening to animals and even dedicating your life to try and do something about it, you still are disconnected. And when you grow up in a culture that devalues pigs, chickens, and cows to the extent that we do, inevitably you're going to be devaluing them as well. We can't escape like the culture we grew up in. We're just so affected by social norms and the people around us. Like I said, I feel conflicted because there's lots of stuff in the film I don't really like, but I think that the filmmakers are very well intentioned and trying to make a positive difference in the world, and their efforts are greatly needed. At the same time, you know, I want to be honest and recognize that I think that this conspiracy vibe is very hyperbolic and will likely lead to many people thinking this is just a vegan propaganda film that they can't trust. So, and I think that means that it's probably going to appeal mostly to people who are already convinced. The tiny minority of people who see this for what it is, or closer to that anyway, and are the niche group, but get to have this confirmation where it's like, actually, look, we're right. And I think we are right, but, you know, we don't want to just appeal to people who are already convinced. Which reminds me, my experience in the theatre was heightened by a woman who was sitting behind me who occasionally was very vocal with her commentary. So someone would say something and she would say, fucking scumbag. I'm just like, and that reminds me of something that I think they did really well in this film, and that I think they do really well in all of their films, which is to interview people about their values, which in this case was about, you know, spirituality and religious beliefs, and then bring up the question of animal suffering and animal slaughter and eating animals, and watch people talk themselves into these like ridiculous contradictions trying to justify their behavior. You know, you have a Buddhist who has this belief in reincarnation. So the interviewer is like, when you were eating that pig, I mean, couldn't that have been your mother? And he's like, well, yeah, I mean, in a real sense, it was my mother, but it tasted good. There is no good way to say that your mother tasted good, but that, really? Do you really have that belief that like that was your mum reincarnated and you're still okay with eating her? But there was loads of things like that, and it happens in all of these films. I mean, people are really defensive about this problem because they feel complicit, and people say stupid shit, you know? And it's both sad and entertaining to watch people try and justify this mess on camera. And so while there are a few things I don't like about this film, especially the overly hyperbolic conspiracy vibe and the idea that I'm not buying that they were like in danger by the church and whatever, I do find myself wanting to like zoom out and consider what's happening on this planet with animals and how they are devalued to such an extent that they're treated more like objects than they are sentient beings. And you have these filmmakers who are becoming aware of that and using their skills and their time and their efforts to try and change our perception of our relationship with animals and to try and open our eyes to become more aware of their suffering so that one day this doesn't need to be happening to them. And like the vegan woman who was behind me in the theatre, I find myself getting fucking frustrated at people constantly trying to justify what is unspeakable suffering. We are talking about pigs screaming in agony in gas chambers. We're talking about chickens going through a process called live shackle slaughter, where a small percentage of them are literally boiled alive in a scalding tank. I've spoken to slaughterhouse workers myself who have admitted to skinning cows while they're fully conscious because the line speed is just so incredibly fast in these large facilities. These are sentient beings who are having an experience that is as visceral as a fucking human child. There's no reason to think that a cow being skinned alive feels any less bad than a human child being skinned alive. So this really is obscene, and it's high fucking time we started taking it seriously. So I commend anyone's efforts in trying to change this world for animals when the situation is just so bad and you get shit for trying to do something about it. So despite my grievances, Kip, thank you for making this film, and I'm glad the church didn't kill you. Another film I watched recently was called The Smell of Money, which it's going to sound kind of gross. I mean, but it's not done in a gross way. It's about how the pork industry is literally spraying shit on black communities where they live.
Oh my God! My house is full of shit!
And, I've thought a lot about animal suffering, but I've also thought quite a lot about how humans are suffering in the industry through slaughterhouses. My father is a slaughterhouse worker, and I've spoke to many of them. But something I didn't really know much about was how people who live near factory farms are being so disrespected and disregarded by the meat industry. And a lot of the things I didn't like about Chrspiracy were not done by the smell of money. Like it was done in what I felt like was a very honest and genuine way and not super hyperbolic. And there's trade-offs here. Like I'm saying, I don't know what the right thing for filmmakers to do is. Maybe it's the case that being super hyperbolic is a good strategy. Maybe you get less attention by having this more kind of like genuine approach. But either way, I thought that this was a really well-made film that didn't have lots of the annoying things that the Spiracy series has. And if you're in the UK, you can watch it for like 99 pence on Amazon Prime. It's probably something similar in the US or other places in Europe. I'm not sure. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that as a very contrasting film that still creates a feeling of outrage in the viewer because you're really like learning about the suffering that these people are going through and just the sheer lack of respect that the meat industry gives to these people. Anyway, I do apologize that this is genuine. Usually I spend a lot of time thinking about what exactly I'm going to say before I say it. And I felt like I was kind of just rambling at you. So do let me know what you think. I'm sure in this ramble, I have said things that are silly and stupid, and I've probably had some bad takes as well as reasonable takes. I do find the idea of like watching an animal related movie and kind of like analyzing it and thinking about what's good and what I don't like. It's like really super interesting for me. And I hope it was interesting for you. If you like this, maybe I'll do it with more films. I know there's another movie coming out next month called I Could Never Be Vegan, I think it's called I Could Never Be Vegan. I saw the trailer, and that's coming out in theaters next month in London. So if you like this, maybe I'll check that one out as well and do a little review of that. If I get cancelled for this, for criticizing a vegan film, then maybe I won't do that. Maybe you'll never see me again. But a big thank you for watching, and thank you to my lovely Patreons for supporting the channel and making these videos possible, and for also making my documentary possible, which is where most of my time is going. So that's why I'm less active on YouTube these days, is because I'm focusing my attention on that film. And I actually just got back from the US shooting more stuff. And I think I got some really powerful stuff. I'm really excited. It's going to be one huge Chrspiracy.